and welcome to my channel True Crime and Trials, and today I will be talking about the Groves trial day 4. So day 4 is the 10th of January, which would have been Dylan's first birthday, and the state rests their case. So now we are on to the defence, and the first witness up for Jessica's defence is Jessica herself. Now this testimony is the most infuriating, the most angering testimony I have ever heard from a defendant. She was absolutely disgusting. That I can't keep my opinion in about that. It was just purely disgusting, and I suggest if anybody has been following this case to go watch it. So obviously it's her attorney that gets up, and obviously, you know, I don't like this guy. So he starts off by saying, "Did you and you only cause the death of your son, Dylan Groves?" To which she replies, "Yes." He asks if Daniel participated in the killing of Dylan. She says no. She says Daniel wasn't aware of any of the injuries she caused Dylan. She hid all injuries to Dylan from Daniel. The injuries Dylan received were done on the 27th of March, and Dylan died on the 28th of March. Patricia Kraft never examined Dylan, and after Dylan had died, he was in the house for a couple of days. Then they took him to the well. He asked her if she murdered Dylan, and she said no, not intentionally. So the state gets up, and wow, this woman is amazing. I mean, she's taking no prisoners with Jessica whatsoever. She's not pussyfooting around her. She's asking her direct questions and getting her to tell the court and the jury what happened to Dylan. So Jessica says it was an accident. And she caused the rib fractures by dropping him. She doesn't remember how she caused the skull fractures, and then she said it had to be from dropping him. No. She's asked about the other fractures, and she starts getting angry at the attorney and started pointing her finger at her. And the attorney is literally shouting at her to answer the question because she was refusing to answer. She was crying. She was saying, I don't know. And then she turns around and says, I don't have to answer to you. She starts crying. She won't stop crying, so they're going to recess while she sorts herself out. So once they come back again, she doesn't remember how he got the upper arm fracture. She's adamant it was an accident. The attorney shows autopsy pictures again. And she's saying, you know, think of the fracture. You know, continuously asking her, how on earth does she not remember how Dylan got these numerous fractures all over his body? How does she not remember that? Jessica says because her mind wasn't clear because of the drugs. She doesn't remember how many accidents there were. And then she gets angry again, saying, you've wrecked my family, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's just absolutely mind-blowing how she is on the stand. She didn't realise she was pregnant until she was about 5.5 months pregnant, which was end of October, and Daniel found out in the beginning of November. And she said Daniel didn't know she was doped up while she was pregnant because she kept it a secret. Now, I can't pretend to know how someone doesn't know. I've never been in that situation personally. But everyone that saw her at the hospital and after seemed to know. How he didn't, I have no clue. She doesn't remember what accident killed Dylan. She says she wrapped him up in plastic and Daniel helped. And a picture is shown of when the coroner had opened the makeshift coffin up of everything that was inside the coffin, and the attorney asked Jessica where she got all that from. She went, I don't know, outside. So then the attorney turns around and says, from outside? Where specifically did you get all this to put inside it? And then Jessica turns around and says, well, I sure didn't get it from under the kitchen sink. I mean, where is this woman's head? She is sat on the stand in front of a court and a jury, and has an attitude because she's being questioned about the murder of her baby son, which she admitted to doing. She said her and Daniel took Dylan to the well on the four-wheeler. She said they put him in the well and then they sat in the field and cried. And at one point she said that they did this so she could go and visit her baby. The attorney points out that when she was in custody, she wasn't crying and she was more worried about the dogs. And Jessica says she was in shock and she hasn't had a chance to grieve the death of her baby. And I think at this point the attorney's like, she's not going to answer anything. She's not making herself look good anyway. What's the point? So she sits down. Her defence lawyer gets back up and he's saying, she says she's telling the truth and she's coming clean, trying to make out that it's a good thing that she's told them that it was her that murdered him. And again, she says she did not kill her baby intentionally. Daniel's defence lawyer gets up and brings up the dream catcher, and Jessica says the dream catcher that fell on Dylan's head didn't cause the bruising. Or did cause the bruising, sorry. The state lawyer hasn't finished with her yet and brings up what Dylan Jr. has said in his testimony previously. And she says, so Daniel Jr., when he testified yesterday, said he saw the bruising on Dylan's head. Now, Jessica is saying it was a small bruise, and Daniel Jr. described a much bigger bruise that he saw. And she doesn't know why he said that, because, it was a small bruise. She doesn't know why he testified to say it was a bigger bruise. So obviously she's saying her son's lying. So at this point, Jessica's defence has rested. So now it's Daniel's defence, and he goes up to the stand. They bring up the previous shoplifting charges he has. He was convicted in January 2019 and he received probation. He said he thought Jessica was going to prenatal appointments. He was working at the time, so he took her word for it that she was attending the appointments. On the way to the hospital when she was in labour, she told him that she'd been taking drugs and hadn't been to any prenatal appointments, so he said he didn't know up until that point. He said he was shocked. And in the labour room, he felt intimidated by Jessica, so he was reluctant to answer questions. Plus, he'd only just learnt about the drugs and the missed appointments just before. He said Jessica can be intimidating at times. She would sometimes threaten him with leaving him, but this was normal in their relationship. He says he did go into the nursery to see Dylan, and he actually asked previously, but a nurse said he couldn't yet because they needed to assess him and get him on oxygen and everything, but they would let him know, but they actually didn't. So he had to ask again, and it was about an hour later. And he did actually ask what was going on with Dylan and what was wrong with him. He stayed at the hospital all day. Daniel hadn't taken any drugs when he was at the hospital, but he had been awake for over 36 hours, and this was based on the observations that the nurses had made, thinking that he was under the influence. He was putting it down to being so tired and being awake for so long. And And he says the urine that he was collecting from his son Daniel Jr. was for a buddy of his. How true that is, I don't know. He does recall the bruising on Dylan's head, but not the swelling, which is what Daniel Jr. had said yesterday, that he saw swelling. So, again, Daniel doesn't know why his son said he saw swelling when he didn't. And he says it was a small bruise also. He says what Daniel Jr. had said in his testimony wasn't accurate because he didn't see any swelling. He didn't know about any other injuries or see the laceration in his arm. He didn't see or suspect Jessica injuring Dylan, and he doesn't know why he didn't know he'd been hurt, and he thought the extra crying he was doing was because of the drug withdrawals. He didn't think that Jessica had been hurting him, or he was crying because he was in pain. He says Jessica was very upset when he found Dylan had passed away in his crib. She kept telling Daniel that he was going to get blamed for it because he had custody of Dylan, and this made him very scared. He said Jessica was being very forceful and kept saying over and over that they, as in the police and child services, were going to blame him and not her. He believed her, so that's why he suggested the well. He lied to law enforcement because he was scared and afraid. If he'd have known, he wouldn't have let her near him. He believes he was deceived by Jessica. Jessica's defence gets up and he says Jessica has never harmed Daniel Jr. and Daniel Jr. had never said anything to him if she had. So, state's turn, and it's the male attorney that gets up this time. We found out that Daniel smoked marijuana, and saying that Daniel Jr. must have been mistaken with the dates that he gave his dad urine, because Daniel said he didn't ask for any more after Dylan was born, and obviously Daniel Jr. had said that he'd given his dad urine after Dylan was born. So again, they're questioning their son's testimony. He says he didn't leave the hospital to get high. He says Jessica stayed there just a couple of nights, and he said that he told Patricia Kraft that, and she said it was fine. But Patricia didn't say any of this in her testimony, whether... I don't know. He said he bathed Dylan, he changed his diapers, everything. He still didn't notice anything. He had told Detective Jodie Conkle that he thought he had seen Jessica hit Dylan a couple of times, but he wasn't sure if it was a dream because he was very sleep deprived. He had told her he had seen her hit him 4 times in the head. What was going through this man's mind? He said that Jessica had hit Dylan because he wouldn't stop crying and she'd shook him. He said she was so aggravated and agitated, and said that if Daniel had bought her some coke, she wouldn't be that way. This is all so messed up. This poor baby, that poor child, and their other son. I mean, what the hell? He says she was always wanting him to buy her drugs. Daniel had also said that Jessica had aggressively picked Dylan up by his ribs, which is more than likely the cause of the rib fractures, not the fact that she dropped him. He saw Jessica be aggressive with Dylan. Even after he'd seen Jessica hit Dylan, he didn't report anything and he didn't stop her. But he says the hitting wouldn't have caused his death. He was aware of the one head and rib fractures, but none of the others before Dylan died. He thought Dylan had just died. He didn't know she was back on drugs or hadn't been going to her drug therapy appointments. And then again, bringing up the fact that he'd promised to protect Dylan and Daniel Jr. and over his wife. He'd made the promise that he would choose his kids over his wife, and he still doesn't believe he broke that promise. What? His defence attorney gets up, and apparently Patricia Kraft didn't report a lot of what he said. And he thought Dylan had died from SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome, which a lot of babies die in their sleep. And because of that, because of Dylan's death, because of Child Services involvement and Jessica's threats, that's why he didn't call 911. So they rest their case, and that's it. We are getting ready for closing statements. So I will be back with another video with the closing statements. I apologise for my anger. It was bad enough watching it and reading it back. So I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.